So I'm going to tell you the truth about home ownership that, in my opinion, people don't talk about enough because in a lot of ways, if you don't structure it properly, it's not all it's cracked up to be. And I'm a homeowner. I own commercial property. I also own residential properties, or rental properties that I rent out. And the truth is that, there's been a lot of propaganda out there for the past several years telling people that, it's still a good time to buy, or housing prices are still going up. And I kind of checked out from the housing market after 2022, just because I saw interest rates go up and I knew what was going to happen. I knew that with high interest rates and high home prices, either rates were going to have to come to the floor, or prices were going to have to start dropping in order to come back to their center. And what I always tell people when they're buying a house is that the thing you want to look at the most is, can you afford the payment, number one, and how does it compare with rent in your area? Because the truth is, if I was looking at buying a house in Newport Beach, which at one point I was, the only reason you would do that is because you had a lot of cash that you needed to park somewhere, and it's a stable asset over time, but it's a non-yielding asset. It's more of a lifestyle purchase. It's not going to make you money. People who tell you it's a good investment don't actually understand cash flow, because purchasing a home is not an investment unless you have income from it, unless it's like a rental property or something like that. And so for most people, the reason that you want to buy a house is, or one of the benefits of buying a house, is that long term, it's going to benefit you because you have a fixed payment, or a relatively fixed payment. But the truth about that people don't tell you when you're buying it, is that your property taxes and your insurance go up every year, and sometimes they go up a lot. And for example, my house, we live up in the mountains, just outside of Denver. And, it's great. It's beautiful up here. But when we bought our place, our payment was about $3,700 a month. And now it's at $5,000 a month because insurance and property taxes went way up. Mostly insurance went up because of fire risk in the area. And so if you're not aware of this when you're going into a property, that these things can happen. I mean, a lot of homeowners in Florida got hit with this exact same problem. And it's why homes in Florida, in terms of pricing, have fallen through the floor. That, coupled with there was a huge run up in price because everyone was fleeing Nazi California during the pandemic, because they just wanted to go outside and enjoy not wearing a mask. And so they went to Florida, and that drove up housing prices, because they were selling their 2-bedroom condo in San Jose for $10 million. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, obviously, but seriously, that's what drove up prices in that market. And so while I agree that long-term, getting into a piece of real estate or buying an asset like that, especially if you're just renting right now, is a better situation, because for me, I'll give you an example. When I bought the first building I bought was not my primary residence. It was my commercial building. And the reason I did that was because it was a stable place for my business to grow. And I was tired of my rent getting jacked up substantially in the place I was at. And it just felt like a very stabilizing force in my life. And so that's why I went and I made the decision to buy that commercial building. And when I bought it, what happened was, I got locked into long-term solid debt that was at a fixed payment. My payment was around $3,000 a month. And, my rent on that place would have been $5,000 a month or more by now. And so that was ultimately a good investment and a good decision, because it capped that expense on a monthly basis. But if you don't pay attention to things like insurance or where you're buying or what's going on, it cannot end up serving the purpose that you're hoping for. And a secret that I'll tell you, and the whole purpose of making this video, is the actual truth that people don't talk about when you're buying a property, is that it's actually supposed to be hard, or it's supposed to feel hard when you're getting into the property. It's supposed to be nerve-wracking. It's supposed to be overwhelming. You're taking on a large debt. I'm not here to pitch you on the virtues of home ownership, because the truth is, when you own a home, you have all sorts of expenses that go with it. That's why I advise most first-time buyers to, if they can deal with it, buy a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex instead. I think it's the best financial decision you can ever make. And most multimillionaires and billionaires will agree with me. And the reason is if you're not an actual entrepreneur, if you're not someone that's going to go out and build a business, it's one way that you can literally create financial freedom for yourself. And it's an actual asset because it's spinning off cash flow. It's not just an expense. When you buy a house, You have a roof to worry about. You have HVAC to worry about. You have plumbing to worry about. You have like a Federal Pacific electrical panel. That thing's a fire hazard, and you're going to have to repair or replace all of these things, and it becomes, an anchor. And right now, labor costs have gone through the roof on all the trades. And so everything, any type of repairs that you're doing on your property can get very expensive very quickly. And so you'll get into this house and you'll think it's the American dream, and then you'll quickly find out it's not all it's cracked up to be, and you'll be overwhelmed if you're caught off guard by those expenses. So that's the key, is you don't want to be caught off guard. You do want to be prepared for those. But the truth is it's supposed to be a little nerve-wracking, a little hard when you get into it. And I got, when I bought my place, I had help from a family member that gave me help with the down payment. I had to pay them back plus interest, and then I had a hard money loan first, and he didn't care that I had, was using some money for the second, because he's like, listen, I have a first position note on there. I had 2 years to refinance the property, so it was like the clock was ticking when I got in, because I had a balloon payment on that hard money. And it's really common to do this in commercial. It's completely different in a when you're buying a house. But the truth is it was hard, it was nerve-wracking, but ultimately was one of the best decisions I ever made. And right now, I'm actually selling that property. I might do a 1031 exchange. I haven't decided yet, but I don't have the business anymore because I sold the company. And so now I'm, getting rid of that property, and I have over 300 grand in equity in that property, an easy 300 grand, not a fake 300 grand, because I'm some delusional seller that doesn't want to price my property at market. If I wanted to fire sale it, I might have 250 in equity in there, but I'm not under pressure to where I need to fire sale it tomorrow, and it's priced pretty aggressively as is, and so it should move pretty quickly. But my whole point is, if you don't go into it knowing that it's going to be hard in the beginning, or having that expectation and then being prepared for it, and therefore you never make the jump because it just doesn't feel right, this is what you want to look for, is what would the equivalent rent be by comparison. And because I was buying that with hard money, my first on that property was actually affordable. It was $2,400 a month. That was interest only. But my second, because I had to pay that thing off in 2 years, and it was amortized because it was, like I said, a family friend that had helped me out. My payment was close to $5,000, so my rent essentially went from $2,500 to $5,000, almost doubled. And that's not a usual scenario. But when you're buying a house, or you're looking at buying a house, right now, for the first time in years, we're starting to get into a situation where the rent versus buy equation is neutral, or leaning in the favor of buying. And I made a video about this, showing specific examples, because the truth is, this is house specific. This is going to be zip code specific. This is region specific. If you're in Newport Beach, for example, that was, it's not even a comparison. I mean, I can rent a waterfront flat with parking for a boat, a 40-foot boat, for probably $10,000 a month there. And if I wanted to buy that place, there's not anything with a dock in Newport Beach right now for less than $4.5 to $5 million is tip. And some people are on crack. They're asking $7 million for a flat like that. And the mortgage payment on a $4 to $5 million house, you're talking $30,000 a month. And so I would rent all day in Newport Beach. I'd be better off if I had $5 million to buy a house. I would take that money and I could put that in an interest-bearing account, spitting off 4% a year, which is what a high yield savings spits off at the moment, or 3.75%. That's $20,000 a month, and then I could use that money to pay rent and live off of it. It just doesn't make sense. And there's plenty of people willing to rent out, their trophy assets to you, those oceanfront houses. And so in that market, it always makes more sense to rent versus buy, depending on what your goals are, for the money. But if you're just trying to park cash there, and you have the cash to do it, I mean, it's a rich people's game. It's not something the average American looks at. It's not something I can look at right now. I don't have that kind of dough. But when I look in Denver, there's deals all over the Denver metro area. There's deals all over Florida. There's deals all over Texas. Right now, Austin, one of the markets that bubbled up the most, is down like 40% from its peak. And people might think that 40% is not that big of a drop. And then they say, oh, but prices, they went up 60, 70%. Yeah, that's my point. If a house is $100,000 and it goes up 60%, that means it's $160,000. If it comes down 40%, that means it's about 110. And so, or close to 100. And so if it doesn't have to if it goes up 60%, it doesn't have to come down 60% to be back where it started. And so right now things are getting more affordable on a rent versus buying basis. And so it makes more sense to buy in a lot of markets. And I was just showing one of my former employees who I'm helping get into a property that, one of these properties in one of the areas he's looking at, it would be $3,900 to rent on average, maybe $4,000. But you could buy that same house for $3,500, to $4,000, depending on how you structure the financing. And so it's basically the same to buy versus rent. And, the benefits of home ownership are obvious in that you start to, build equity in something. And then long term, you're able to fix your payment a little bit. Like I said, you can still get hosed by the insurance companies and property taxes because, hey, the government loves to tax you and take your money because they're lazy fucks that don't want to, make their own money. They just want to take your hard-earned dollars because you own a piece of dirt. And there's ways around that. You can put your stuff into a nonprofit or a foundation and then leave it to charity when you die, and you can get out of property taxes that way. Because honestly, I'm not going to pretend to know how to do that. I just looked into it briefly and talked to a tax accountant about title holding and things like that. And so the truth is, when you're starting out, when you're buying a starter home, it's supposed to feel hard. I had, like I said, that same family friend that lent me the money to get into my first commercial property when she first bought her property in Southern California. This was over 30 years ago. She could not afford to buy, is what her realtor told her. And she looked at her financial situation and she looked at her income, and she was a median income earner, so she wasn't a high earner. And her realtor told her, you can't afford a house, but you can probably afford a fourplex. And so she bought one because that was all she could afford. And to this day, she says it was the best financial decision she ever made. And this is why. When she first got in, it was really hard for her to pay the mortgage. It was close to 50% DTI, meaning her mortgage was half of her monthly income. So it really took a lot of her income just to pay the mortgage every month. But today, all of those units combined are pushing close to $14,000 a month in income. The property's paid off, and it's now a really healthy source of income for her. And that's what I always tell people, is when you're buying a property, what happens is you start to protect yourself from inflation because you get on the other side of the equation. You see, once you own an asset that is getting inflated, essentially not because it's going up in value, it's more the dollar is going down in value because the government's retarded and they don't know how to implement actual responsible fiscal policy. They just keep printing money into the trillions, and they make it so that it's impossible for you, the average American, to buy anything because, there's a saying when it comes to inflation that inflation is just a tax on the poor and the middle class. And the way that works is if things get more expensive, who feels that the most? The person that's check to check making $50,000 a year, or the person making $250,000 a year that's in the top 10% as an earner? It's the bottom half of the economy. And right now it's really the bottom 90% of the economy is feeling it. I mean, I'm technically a higher income earner on paper, but every time we go to the grocery store, every time we live just doing basic stuff in America, I'm looking at how fucking expensive it is, and it's such a ripoff. It's a total joke. When I go to other countries, I was in Europe for 3 weeks, and when we were in Europe, I was like, how is Europe? I mean, we were going out to eat at decent restaurants, and it was half of what it would cost in the United States. You're being sold a lie when you're told, gaslit into being told, everything's affordable, or especially realtors that have been telling you it's a great, and I mean, I'm a realtor, but still, I was not telling people that it was a great time to buy in 2022. I was telling people the exact opposite. I was also saying the same thing in 23 and 24, but now I'm starting to change my tone a little bit because I'm not emotional about this stuff. I just look at the numbers, and I'm looking at the fact that if rent is becoming more than it is to buy, and part of that is because for every seller we have that's on crack and asking too much for their property, we have a seller that's realistic, that's understood that housing prices are coming down, that understands that interest rates are still high. We're at 6%, we're not at 3%. And so they're going to have to adjust accordingly so that things, come down to be a little bit more affordable. And as a result, buyers are able to get into properties now that actually make sense. And I'm not saying every property makes sense. I'm not saying every metro makes sense. If you're living in a high income metro, like, the Bay Area or Southern California, forget it. You're gonna have to get out of those areas if you think there's nothing affordable about Southern California or New York or any of these cities. And so some of that is just, if that's your expectation, that you want to be able to afford, a nice home on a median income salary in San Francisco or in Southern California, in these states where they have extremely competitive job markets, you have a ton of very high earners, I would just tell you to politely recalibrate your expectations. But that's my take on home ownership. Is like, when you first get into it, it's always a little nerve-wracking. It's always a little hard in the beginning. And I just tell people, if you can afford the payment and it's similar to what you'd be paying in rent, then pull the trigger. I mean, if you're going to stay there for at least 3 to 4 years or more, then it's worth it to do it. If you're going to sell in a couple of years, you should definitely rent. Don't even think about buying. You're going to lose too much money when you buy and sell. And I wouldn't even tell you to sell. In 3 to 4 years, it'd be better to just turn that into a rental. If you have the wherewithal to hire a property manager, which is very easy, and they'll take care of all the headache for you for a very small fee, just based on the percentage of rent. And then 10 years go by and you look at it and you have a nice little source of income that you don't have to deal with. It's not without its headaches. That's why I tell people, buy in a nice neighborhood, buy in the nicest area you can, because the truth is, if you have one bad tenant that you have to evict, all your profit goes out the window and it becomes a total pain in the ass to get them out. But it doesn't happen that often. If you look at the amount of evictions on a comparative basis, I mean, if you're a big landlord and you have 20 properties, you're going to deal with an eviction someday. And even my family friend I was just telling you about that bought that property that was a fourplex, and it was hard for her to get into, and now it's a nice source of a 6-figure income for her, and it's a paid off property. She still had to deal with evicting tenants, and so it's not without its caveats. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section. I'm curious to hear your take, if you found that helpful. And as promised earlier, there's a video popping up on the screen right now about the renting versus buying equation, and so I can show you what it actually looks like in 2026, because the market's changed, it's changing quickly. And anyways, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.